Among the Dead Sea Scrolls, there are fragments of at least 30 scrolls that contain copies of the biblical book of Isaiah. The oldest copy, where the verse that we are interested in is still readable, is this one. It is often referred to as the Great Isaiah Scroll. This copy was made somewhere around the late 2nd century BC. And here is our verse. In English translations, this is verse 18 of chapter 30. We're going to walk through a translation of this verse as it appears in this manuscript, and we'll try to work out what it was that the author of this ancient prophecy was trying to say. But before we dive into that, as always, let's begin with some context. The book of Isaiah deals with the events in the histories of the kingdoms of Israel and Judah from the middle of the 8th century into the 6th century BC. The prophet, YHWH, or Isaiah, lived during the reign of 4 different kings of the kingdom of Judah. The section of the text that we are looking at concerns the events that occurred during the reign of King Hezekiah, or Hezekiah. The main players on the geopolitical stage were the Neo-Assyrian Empire and the Kingdom of Egypt. The Assyrians destroyed the city of Samaria, the capital of the Kingdom of Israel, and the kingdom was assimilated into the Assyrian Empire. When Hezekiah succeeded his father Ahaz to the throne of Judah, he stopped paying tribute to Assyria. He also instituted religious reforms. He restored Yahweh's temple in Jerusalem as the center for worship in Judah. He removed a lot of the synchronistic religious practices that had been part of religious life in Judah for some time. He even strengthened his military and expanded his territory. Now, Sennacherib, the ruler of the Assyrian Empire, in 701 BC launched a military campaign into the southern Levant to put down the rebellion of vassal states that had stopped paying tribute after the death of Sargon II, Sennacherib's father, one of these vassals being the Kingdom of Judah. It is worth pointing out that the Kingdom of Judah was no doubt seen by the Assyrians as insignificant, and it's likely that the intention of Sennacherib was to plunder this tiny kingdom in order to finance his larger campaign in Egypt. The military strength of Judah was absolutely no match for the Assyrian forces that were about to invade, so repelling the invading army with Judah's military was not an option for King Hezekiah. It is this military invasion that is the historical context for the section of text that contains our verse. The book of Isaiah, as it comes to us in the Hebrew Bible, is a large collection of prophetic oracles, along with some bits of narrative. And it is by no means, in any sense, in chronological order. The oracles are more or less arranged thematically. The narrative section of the book of Isaiah that tells the story of the Assyrian invasion of Judah is in chapters 36 and 37. The collection of oracles that precede this section all have to do with the pronouncement of judgment by Yahweh on Israel for covenant breaking. The term Israel here would include both the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. The oracles in chapter 30 are specifically regarding the Assyrian invasion of Judah in the late 8th century BC, and they contain theological explanations for why this is happening. And they also include warnings not to rely on the kingdom of Egypt for help when Yahweh's judgment comes. The section of the text that is the immediate context for our verse is verses 15 through 18 of chapter 30. Now, just as a side note, I want to point out that if you are reading this in any of the popular English translations, they will break verse 18 off from this section with a heading. And I have no idea why they do this. But since we are translating from this manuscript, and the scribe here clearly groups verse 18 with verses 15 through 17 by deliberately putting space before and after this section of text, that's how we're going to read it. This oracle opens in the voice of Isaiah speaking to King Hezekiah and the people of Judah. It begins with the standard introductory formula, thus says. Then we have Adoni Yahweh Kadosh Yisrael, which is my master Yahweh, Holy One of Israel. Here, Isaiah invokes the covenant name and uses the title, Holy One of Israel, which most of the occurrences of this title in the Hebrew Bible are found in the book of Isaiah, which makes sense given the overarching theme of the book of Isaiah being the restoration of the original covenant kingdom. And it is worth noting that after the fall of the northern kingdom, the city of Jerusalem grew dramatically in size, as refugees fled from the north and settled in and around Jerusalem. as seen in the archaeological evidence, with some studies even estimating a doubling in size. So it is fair to say that in Jerusalem at the time of Isaiah, there was a remnant of all the tribes that made up the original United Kingdom of Israel. Now, this oracle starts with Yahweh pointing out that his covenant people have not only broken the covenant, but have rejected his offers of reconciliation. This is followed by a warning that rejecting the help that Yahweh is offering will not end well. There's a few things to point out here as far as literary context goes. First, is that the point of the covenant was that Yahweh would be their God, that is, God in the ancient Near Eastern sense, and the people of Israel, that is, the descendants of Jacob, would be his people. Second, divine protection was part of the covenantal agreement. It was part of the blessings for keeping the covenant, and thus, naturally, breaking the covenant would mean the removal of that protection. The curse was often just the inverse of the language used to describe the blessings. We see verse 17 is just the inverse of the type of language found in places like Deuteronomy 32:30 and Leviticus 26:8. So, if the covenant was broken by the people being unjust to each other and or worshiping the gods of other nations, logically, according to the covenant, they would then be ruled over by other nations. And the third piece of literary context we need is that this mention of swift horses in verse 16 is very likely meant to be a reference to trusting in the Egyptian military to defeat the Assyrians and rescue Judah. The Assyrians even allude to the Egyptian military by referring to swift horses and chariots. In the New Living Translation, the word Egypt is inserted in this verse, even though the Hebrew word for Egypt, Mitzrayim, doesn't appear in the text. This is done in order to help the modern English reader get that this is a reference to the kingdom of Egypt. All right. Now I'm going to read this section of the text as it is paraphrased in the New Living Translation, just to get the context, and then we'll get into the grammar and translate verse 18. This is what the Sovereign Lord, the Holy One of Israel, says. Only in returning to me and resting in me will you be saved. In quietness and confidence is your strength. But you would have none of it. You said, "No, we will get our help from Egypt. They will give us swift horses for riding into battle." But the only swiftness you are going to see is the swiftness of your enemies chasing you. One of them will chase 1,000 of you. 5 of them will make all of you flee. You will be left like a lonely flagpole on a hill, a tattered banner on a distant mountaintop. So the Lord must wait for you to come to him, so he can show you his love and compassion. For the Lord is a faithful God. Blessed are those who wait for his help. Now, returning to our manuscript, here we read, "Welekein Yachakeh, Yahweh lachanankem, lekein yarum lerachemkem, ki Elohe mishpat Yahweh, ashrei kol chukeh lo." All right, let's give ourselves a little space to work. Lekein is a conjunction plus a preposition and an adverb, meaning, and according to such conditions, or and that being so, or simply therefore. We typically see it in prophetic literature, where it often introduces a divine declaration after a establishing of the grounds for that declaration. So verses 15 through 17 is the logical grounds for what is about to follow in this verse. Yachekeh is a verb. It is a PL imperfect, third person, masculine, singular. It is from the root chakah, meaning to wait. So he will wait. Now this verb being in the PL stem, which normally, but not always, means an intensifying of the action of the verb. Here it means wait in the sense of eager anticipation. So it can connote the idea of longing or even desperation. Then we have the divine name, and he is the subject of this clause, so Yahweh is the one doing the action of the verb. Lachanankem is a preposition plus a verb. It is a call infinitive construct from the root chanan, meaning to be gracious or to show favor. And we have a pronominal suffix, which is the second person masculine plural, the antecedent being King Hezekiah and the people of Judah. So to be gracious to you. Welekhein is repeated from the first clause. Yarum is a verb. It is a call imperfect third person masculine singular from the root rum, meaning to be exalted or to rise. So he will rise. Lerachemkem is a preposition plus a verb, which is a PL infinitive construct from the root rachem, meaning to have compassion. And we have a pronominal suffix, which is the second person masculine plural. Again, the antecedent being King Hezekiah and the people of Judah. And since this is in the context of judgment for covenant breaking, rendering this to be merciful would be appropriate. So to be merciful to you. Ki is a conjunction, which here we will just render because. Elohe is a noun. It is a masculine plural construct from Eloah, which is a being of the celestial realm. Here, the plural is not a plural of number. Since this construct chain is a description of Yahweh, and Yahweh is a singular noun, this must be singular in number. So the plural is either a plural of abstraction, or it is a superlative. In English, the conventional capital G-O-D will suffice. So God of. Mishpat is a noun meaning the enacting of justice, or the declaration of a sentence or legal decree. We will go with justice. Then we have the divine name again. Ashereh is a noun. It is a masculine plural construct. Incidentally, this word only appears in the Hebrew Bible as a plural construct. And here we see the use of the plural of abstraction. So it is a state of being. It means something like contentment or satisfaction, or even happiness. We will go with satisfaction of. Kal is a noun meaning all or every. It too is in the construct form. So all of. Choke is a verb. It is a kal participle masculine plural construct from the same root as this word. Chaka, meaning to wait. It is a substantival participle, so it is a verb that is functioning as a noun. So waiting ones of. Lo, which is a preposition plus a third person masculine singular pronoun. The antecedent to the pronoun is Yahweh, and the preposition here is functioning as indicating the indirect object. So we can go with for him. Now, before we try to turn this into some form of coherent English, let me just point out a few things about the structure of this verse. It is made up of 4 clauses. The first 2 are a synonymous parallelism, with Yahweh as a shared subject. These 2 verbs both convey the same idea, that is, this sense of eager anticipation, like runners on the starting line or a Formula One pit crew waiting for their car to come in. And what Yahweh is eager to do is to show grace and mercy on behalf of the people of Judah. He is eager to cut them some slack, even though in the past they had broken the covenant. Yahweh is willing and waiting for them to reconcile with him. The next 2 clauses add explanation and points out that Yahweh is the one who judges. He is the offended party. He is the one who decides whether to bring the blessings or curses of the covenant. And furthermore, he is the one that is offering reconciliation. I'll also point out the repetition of this verb. The ones that will receive what Yahweh is eager to give are those who are waiting to receive it, as opposed to those who run away. So the ones that are eagerly anticipating or waiting for Yahweh to be gracious and merciful are the ones that will have that longing satisfied. Now, with all this in mind, we can translate this as, therefore, Yahweh waits to be gracious to you. Therefore, he will rise up to be merciful to you, because Yahweh is a God of justice. Satisfied are all those who wait for him. So verse 18 is the why King Hezekiah and the people of Judah should accept Yahweh's offer of salvation by means of Beshuvah wa nachat, repentance and rest/trust, mentioned in verse 15. So verse 18 in its context is Yahweh stating his position regarding the events of the Assyrian invasion. It is Yahweh stating that he wants to rescue the people of Judah and reconcile with them. The offer is still there, even though up till that point they had rejected it. This seems to be what the author of this text was going for. Now, as to whether or not Hezekiah and the people of Judah took Yahweh up on his offer of reconciliation, well, the answer is sort of. You can just read the rest of the story to see how it turned out. There isn't just the account here in the book of Isaiah. We actually have a few historical accounts of the Assyrian invasion of Judah. It's fascinating stuff. When it comes to ancient historical events, we rarely get multiple accounts from different perspectives. We even have Assyrian accounts of what happened. But we can get into that some other time, maybe if I go through a translation of some of the narrative portions of the book of Isaiah in another video. When the Assyrian army left Judah and finally went home, Jerusalem and the Davidic dynasty remained intact. And that was about all that was left of the kingdom of Judah. Just a small remnant, a band of survivors. Things unfolded just like in the oracle that contains our verse. Hezekiah did end up like a lone banner on a hill, alone, surrounded, and presumably doomed. And this verse serves to tell the reader of the book of Isaiah that the option for reconciliation with Yahweh was there the whole time.